Good afternoon and welcome to this European Roundtable on bringing energy storage solutions to market. My name is Linda van Duivenbode and I'm from Ideas from Europe. I will be your co-host for this afternoon session together with Yillis, who's the President of Energy Storage NL. I'm going to give you some practical information and house rules. First of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy for being our partner in organizing these sessions and working with us. You can leave your camera on if you like, because of course we like to see who we're speaking to back in your home or office environment, but please keep your microphone switched off. This is an interactive session, so the chat function is available for you to ask questions to us, to the speakers, but you can also interact with each other. We are really about connections and working together. So please also look at the participants in the session and see who you want to connect with in there as well. This session is being recorded, so be aware. And we're also live on YouTube. YouTube, there is no interaction with us, so only this Zoom meeting can interact with us. We will, of course, answer questions live as much as we can, and where we can't answer them in today's session, we will save the chat and look at the questions later, have people answer them and come back to all of you. We have two polls in this session. The first poll we will open at the beginning, so now, and we will come back to the results later. So you have time to give your answer and we will come to the results a bit later. And now for the start of the program and introducing everyone, I would like to hand to Yillis.
Linda, thank you very much. So hello everybody, welcome to this session on energy storage. And I think we have a rather impressive program for you this afternoon when it's live, and perhaps when you're watching the recording any time of the day. We'll first start with an overview of what's happening in Brussels, the European policy, and that will be presented by Brittany Alzara from the European Association for Energy Storage. And then to setting the scene, we'll get an overview of the existing markets, what's happening in Europe and where is the market going. That will be presented by Delta EE on the European market monitoring of energy storage. Then we will come back to the studio here in Leiden, and as energy storage provides a plethora of options, we've divided it into four more detailed subsections, which will be treated in more detail by the different groups. So we will be talking about the actual grid, the electricity grid, can energy storage provide a contribution there. We will be looking at electric mobility, industrial electrification, how can electricity storage play a role there, and in the built environment. So that will be the program for this afternoon. And Linda, we already initiated the poll, but perhaps you can expand a little bit on the question which is being asked and where people are going to respond to, which we will be discussing after the initial two presentations.
Yeah, these are actually two questions I took from a recent webinar organized by EASE and Delta EE on a report that they have just issued on policy and market. And this first one is, where do people see the market growing in certain regions in Europe?
So we know the market is growing, but we're very much interested in your opinion. Where do you see the biggest opportunities? So looking forward to see your response. And with that, I would like to hand over to Brittany to expand a little bit on what's happening in Brussels. Brittany, go ahead.
All right. I hope you can hear and see me. I just need to find my presentation so I can share it. All right. Okay, is that working?
It's in the process. Yes.
It's there.
Okay, perfect. So I'm the policy manager at EASE. I've been asked to present about the energy storage developments we see at EU level. Frankly, because there's so much going on, it's really difficult to summarize in a relatively short presentation, but I will do my very best. And I'm available if you have any questions or comments afterwards. So first of all, I'd like to introduce EASE for those of you who have not heard of the association. EASE represents almost 60 members now that are developing all different types of storage technologies and applications, including batteries, pumped hydro storage, power to gas, thermal storage, basically all different types of storage technologies that are available on the market and in development. And our role is to engage with EU policymakers and make sure that the market's design at EU level is supportive of energy storage, that there's funding available for storage, research and demonstration projects, and to engage with all different stakeholders, including, for example, NSOE and ETSO, on the rollout of the market design and policies for storage. Actually, this year is our 10-year anniversary, so a lot of things have happened over the past 10 years, and now we're really seeing storage kind of get on policymakers' agendas. So first, before I go into the EU policy, just want to summarize why we need energy storage. We all know that the decarbonization challenge is accelerating with new targets for 2030 and 2050. That means we will need increasing amounts of power system flexibility at all different timescales in order to integrate renewables in a cost-effective way, to minimize curtailment, to shift excess energy to times when it can be used, and to link the electricity sector with heating and cooling, with the gas sector, with the mobility sector, and so on. So energy storage really has an important role to play across all of the different sectors. And without storage, basically, we don't really see the possibility to have an energy transition. So at EU level, as I said, EASE has been active for over 10 years, and we've really seen enormous changes in how energy storage is being considered by policymakers. And I will cover a lot of the high-level developments that we've seen and reflect a little bit on the actions that we see from EASE that need to be prioritized in the coming years. So in 2009, at EU level, we had the third energy package, and this package actually did not mention energy storage at all. So, and policymakers really did not consider the need for storage. This led to a situation where there was no clarity on what actually counts as storage. So whether it's just electricity storage technologies or also power to X technologies. There was no clarity on access to markets by storage devices, on ownership of storage by TSOs and DSOs in the context of the unbundling that was part of the third energy package. And this led to basically very slow and uneven deployment of storage across the EU. So the market design was not right, and the flexibility sources were not being incentivized to be deployed. Now we've seen a lot of changes. Things have come a long way since then with the Clean Energy Package in 2019 that includes a lot of the basic provisions for energy storage to play a role in the system. And then more recently also the EU Green Deal, which kind of builds on the Clean Energy Package, which is with a huge number of files that will have an impact on storage. But then I will reflect on this a bit more later on. We still see that there's no real comprehensive overarching strategy on energy storage, and that is a major issue from our point of view. So just to dive in a little bit where we are today in terms of EU energy storage policy, I think it's useful to look into the Clean Energy Package and what it says for storage. So the Clean Energy Package is the biggest ever package of EU energy legislation, which was finalized in 2019. There are 8 different legislative acts. The ones that have the little stars are the most important for storage, and namely the Electricity Directive and Regulation, which define the market design. These two pieces of legislation set a pretty good basic framework, I would say, for energy storage to have an explicit role in the system. There's a technology neutral definition for energy storage. It sounds basic, but it's actually quite important to make sure that all different storage technologies can be considered and can be deployed. Energy storage is recognized kind of throughout the package as an essential element in the energy transition. It clarifies ownership of storage by transmission and distribution system operators, basically saying that in most circumstances, storage should be a market activity, but allows for TSOs and DSOs to own storage in some circumstances if they can prove there's a market failure. It does require system operators to move more towards market-based tendering of flexibility services and to consider storage and system planning. So this would put storage on a more level playing field with grid expansion and other alternatives to integrate renewables. It establishes non-discrimination in network charging, at least in theory, and kind of expands on the role of active consumers and citizens' energy communities, which would be able to generate, consume, store their own electricity and participate in various markets. So consumers are basically going from being passive actors in the energy system towards active participants. In terms of the market impacts, this will mean that consumers will see more and more, be more and more incentivized to provide flexibility from storage. There's new players that will be entering the system, so aggregators and more commercial industrial customers are increasingly empowered to take part in the electricity markets. TSOs and DSOs are more incentivized to tender flexibility services on the market and to introduce new services such as congestion management. Clean mobility will also lead to more and more need for storage deployments to support charging infrastructure and different applications of vehicle to grid and so on. And then finally, in general, we see the higher renewables targets open up the possibilities for storage and the need for more flexibility services. So in theory, the clean energy package is really, really great for storage. It really does a lot to create, let's say, the minimum requirements you need for storage to play an active role in the system. However, when we go from the theory to the actual implementation, we see a couple issues. So first of all, the implementation of the clean energy package still needs to happen across the EU. Not all member states have implemented the policies into their national law. And then we see also that TSOs and DSOs need to take an active role in really defining and launching these new flexibility services and opening up markets for storage. So if they lag in implementing this, it can be a big problem for storage. And then there's also quite a lot of barriers to storage that are not addressed in the clean energy package for a variety of reasons. One is that grid fees, taxes, network charging are actually national member states' competencies. So that is something that cannot be fully addressed at EU level. We saw one of the major shortfalls of the clean energy package is that it doesn't consider long-term investment signals and revenue certainty for storage. The clean energy package basically assumes that the market for storage and flexibility services will somehow emerge kind of on its own, and then storage will not need any additional support in order to be deployed. Like I said before, there is no comprehensive EU strategy for energy storage. It's kind of assumed to develop on its own now that the clean energy package is implemented. Power to gas is also an area that has not been addressed fully, but should be coming this year. And longer duration flexibility is, in general, a point that has not been supported enough in the clean energy package. So it's really interesting to see what has happened after the clean energy package with the EU Green Deal, which is the von der Leyen Commission's kind of big flagship policy, a group of policy proposals. So it aims to have a kind of comprehensive strategy to accelerate the transition to net zero by 2050. And it's already, it's a huge amount of different policies that have been released. A lot of them have quite a good impact on storage. That's, for example, the strategy for smart sector integration, which recognizes the role of storage in linking the electricity, gas, heating and cooling, mobility sectors. There's a hydrogen strategy, which aims to support the rollout of power to gas technologies. Revision of the 10E regulation, which is all about trans-European energy infrastructure. There's a battery regulation, renovation wave, which is could be quite supportive for storage behind the meter. The revision of the energy taxation directive, which could address some of the double charging and other issues that we see. Although, as I said, taxation and charging for electricity is a member state competence, but the EU can give some general guidelines. So there's quite a lot of different policies underway. It's really challenging to follow all of the different ones, but we see in general quite a positive developments. In next month, we are awaiting the release of the Fit for 55 package. So it's referring to the 55% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030. And there we see in particular that storage should be covered in the Renewable Energy Directive revision. This was actually part of the Clean Energy Package, and already 3 years later, it's considered outdated. And there's going to be an upward revision of the renewable energy targets for 2030. And what we are advocating as EASE is also to consider energy storage as kind of the enabling infrastructure for renewables, and to tackle some of the barriers to hybrid renewable plus storage projects. There's a revision of the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, which is all about charging infrastructure, so it could be quite interesting for storage as well. And energy performance of buildings, which is an opportunity to kind of go from this concept of energy efficiency and building renovation towards energy optimization behind the meter. So really incentivizing consumers to install storage and to provide flexibility to the system. And then towards the end of this year, we're awaiting the revision of the third energy package for gas, which aims to open up markets and enable more power to gas, renewable hydrogen, and other solutions. And finally, the energy environmental aid guidelines for state aid, which could also be quite interesting for storage. So there's a huge number of policies being developed. It's really quite it's really challenging to keep up. And also you see that the European Commission is really struggling to keep up with all the different changes. From the storage perspective, in a nutshell, I would summarize the situation like this. There's a lot of positive changes, and especially if we see, since EASE has been around, the high-level recognition by policymakers and the actions by policymakers towards storage have been really positive. Clean energy package is a really important step, but of course it has to be implemented. Energy storage is definitely recognized by policymakers as one of the essential technologies for the energy transition, and there's more and more funding available for clean energy technologies in Horizon Europe, Innovation Fund, Just Transition Fund, and other EU funding mechanisms. However, as I said, clean energy package implementation is lagging. In some member states, it's really very, very slow. We see increasingly the need for an EU energy storage strategy to really push the storage market, to gather data on where we are in terms of storage deployments and model better how much storage we will need in the future, and possibly define targets for 2030 and 2050. This is something that we think is just, without this, we're not going to have a real fast acceleration of storage deployments. And this is also needed to align all the different EU Green Deal policies, which I just mentioned, across storage. There's also a need for more work on price signals for storage to give long-term investor certainty. And one of the things that we've been working on very recently is recovery and resilience facility funding. There was a huge potential to invest in clean energy technologies, including storage, but from our assessment of the first plans that have been submitted, there's much too little funding and attention for storage. So with this in mind, we have a couple proposals from the EASE side of where we would like to see policymakers at EU and also national level to go when it comes to storage. So first is to focus on technology neutral policymaking, so not picking winners and losers among the technologies, but trying to define flexibility needs, and then being open to all technologies that can meet those needs. And we would like to see at EU level a comprehensive EU energy storage strategy. The Commission is preparing a staff working document on storage for next year, but we'd like that to be kind of expanded to really this comprehensive strategy. And that's been requested by the European Parliament, so we're hoping to see that happen. Clean energy package implementation needs to speed up. We would like to see a lot more activity also on market-based tendering and remuneration for storage services. So having the TSOs and DSOs working together to enable storage to be able to provide these services and allow for revenue stacking and long-term revenue streams. We want all stakeholders to recognize the specific attributes of energy storage rather than slotting storage either as a generator or a consumer, depending on how it's operating, because this can lead to a lot of problems. Unlocking funding for energy storage is still really important to get the storage capacity that we will need in the coming years. Enhancing the link between storage and mobility and really recognizing the role that storage can play there is quite important as well. Supporting the development of long duration storage. There's a lot of focus on power to gas at EU level, but much less on other storage technologies. Considering all energy storage technologies in the context of sustainable finance is really important. Permitting for energy storage projects we're hoping to see addressed now in the Renewable Energy Directive revision. There's a lot to do on that side to help these projects get rolled out. And finally, quite important, to develop the common standards and approaches for safety and sustainability of different storage technologies. You see, we've come a long way at EU level when it comes to storage deployments, but we still have a long way to go. So a lot of activities coming up in the next years, and I'm really happy to see roundtables like these where we're discussing different challenges and also ensuring that the EU policies are implemented at national level in a way that supports the sector. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Brittany. Excellent overview of what's been happening in Brussels for the last 10 years. Before we go to any questions the audience have, I take the liberty of, while I'm here, asking you a question. I mean, you represent EASE, the Brussels organization, and we also have Stefan Olstorn here from Energy Storage the Netherlands. Can you expand a little bit about the way the communication and the alignment is between how can we leverage from what's happening in Brussels towards the different national activities, and in this case, more specifically in the Netherlands?
Right, so we have a collaboration that we do between the European and the national associations on storage, because we see it really important to align our activities. We often benefit from the examples and experiences that are happening at national level, so concrete barriers that come up for storage and so on that we can then bring to the European Commission. And we also try to help the national associations stay up to date with what's happening in the EU, and making sure then that the EU policy is really properly implemented at national level. So I think it's really important to have this kind of collaboration and feedback on both sides. Right now, for example, we're preparing an open letter to the Commission on the recovery and resilience plans with the support of the national associations to really push the European Commission, to push the EU member states to really fully consider storage in their recovery plans, and to dedicate enough funding to climate and energy as they're required to do in the recovery and resilience funds. So that's an example of the type of activity that we do together with the national storage associations.
Excellent, thank you. And indeed, I think that's the clarification of how energy storage is not only a local or national issue, but there are two more levels than that. We have the European approach, and then the implementation in the different countries, and of course the other way around. So the conclusions of today, of course, will be communicated to you as well to ensure that's well very much aligned. So Brittany, thank you very much. I don't think we have any additional questions at the moment. So with having scheduled the overall perspective of what's happening in Europe, it's always good to align that with the, we do have one question. Oh, excellent. John, we're waiting for, we have one question.
So we have one question from Amandine Martins. Is the issue of battery recycling the obstacle to their development?
So the question indeed, how is battery recycling impacting the deployment? Can you expand perhaps on that a bit, Brittany?
Yeah, of course. I don't think it's a major obstacle to deploying storage right now, but we see it as one of the big issues to be addressed in the coming, let's say, 5 to 10 years, as more and more used EV batteries in particular have to be recycled or disposed of. So the batteries regulation is actually aiming to increase recycling rates of lithium-ion batteries, and to make sure that products are designed in a way as to increase the ability to be recycled, and to make sure that there's a business case also for recycling batteries. So I think that's a big issue that needs to be addressed. There's a lot of EU focus in this area, and I think it's already bearing fruit in the sense that the whole battery sector is increasingly coming together to propose different solutions to this. So it's definitely a major obstacle, not in the next 5 years, but beyond that it will be. And I'm happy to see that EU policymakers are already now pushing to define solutions and put them into a regulation that will then have the requirements and the framework to support recycling.
Yeah, and building on that, I think it's also one of the major attention items, for example, within the European Battery Alliance, the second use and recycling of the automotive batteries in Europe. So I fully second what you're saying, Brittany. So with the overall perspective, Brittany, thank you very much for joining us today. Any questions, please feel additional questions later on, please feel free to contact us and we'll make sure to relay them to Brittany. And with that, we were also very interested, of course, in the numbers. Is there a market currently? How big is that market? Where is it going? So, John, can you enlighten us on that perspective?
So I will do my best. So if you can see my screen, I'll start. I'm John Ferris, Head of Flexibility and Storage Research at Delta EE. And for those that don't know the company, we're a research and consulting business that have been helping customers across Europe and beyond to navigate energy transition since 2005. So both flexibility and storage research are among the services that we provide to deliver independent research and insight into key markets, service providers, and the business models that are shaping new energy. As Brittany has already described, there's a lot to summarize in what's going on in the regulations, but the impetus for flexibility and storage substantially comes from the regulations and directives of the Clean Energy Package. And to just summarize in a sentence, it is to improve access to markets in order to attract investment in storage and enable consumer participation in providing storage services. And with the share of renewables in electricity generation to grow to more than 50% by 2030, then there's going to be a lot of flexibility required in the electricity sector. Now, the electricity system has always needed flexibility, but these needs are changing and are going to change in the next decade as the replacement of large thermal plants with renewables reduces the system inertia. It's moving the location of generation and changing the power flows, and it's decentralizing both generation, storage, and flexibility. So the system will need faster responding flexibility, more downward flexibility to cope with increases in renewable generation, not just to cope with peak demand, location specific to cope with congestion on the network. And there are new sources of flexibility, with battery storage in particular emerging as one of the new sources that can deliver flexibility to the markets. And yet storage has to compete to deliver value to the energy system. Demand response, curtailment of renewables, and interconnection also provide flexibility. So while storage already exists at different forms and at different levels of the grid, so does demand-side flexibility and the flexibility that's currently coming from generation. Brittany touched on power to hydrogen and power to ammonia as new sources of flexibility. And the value of interconnection, I think, is highlighted very clearly by the link between the GB market and the Netherlands, that linked by a cable across the North Sea, and yet part of the European-wide balancing regime. TenneT contributes only 100 megawatts of the 3,000 megawatts of FCR capacity, the fast-acting frequency response. As an island, the GB alone requires 20 times that much, nearly 2 gigawatts of fast-acting demand response. Sorry, acting frequency response. And that's just one of the markets that battery storage can participate in and has been the key to driving recent growth. But it was already in 2015 that a Rocky Mountain Institute report identified the versatility of battery storage and the multiple use cases where it can deliver value to the system, whether it's in energy arbitrage of shifting consumption to different times of the day, optimizing self-consumption for consumers with renewable generation on site, avoiding network reinforcement and managing congestion on the network, as well as providing grid stability and resilience, not just to the network as a whole, but to individual consumers. And storage does so often in a way that's less intrusive than demand response. It can offer a faster response than the traditional sources of generation flexibility and can deliver local value by being distributed at a small scale. And yet, the markets that currently exist don't really reward those attributes. There are many markets that storage can participate in, and they are slowly, one by one, opening up to flexibility and storage. But the advantage, the versatility of storage isn't really recognized by these markets that were designed for existing assets like pumped hydro and open cycle gas turbines. For there to be long-term investment signals in electricity storage in particular, value stacking is required. It's not enough to create a storage market for participation of particular assets, because the capacity that is being installed will drive prices down. There's a need for storage to participate across markets and to value stack, to participate in multiple markets, because unlike other assets, storage has more versatility, more capability to move from one market to another. And yet, the inconsistent implementation of the directives is challenging the development of consistent business cases for storage across Europe and leaves open a number of questions, such as, are markets open? Are all of these markets open to storage, to aggregation of small assets, to aggregators themselves, as opposed to a balanced responsible party? What are the baselining and derating methodologies? And how coupled are the markets? Is there a potential for assets within a country to deliver services outside the country, or are they competing with other markets? And these are all questions that we look to address in both the Energy Storage Market Monitor and the Flexibility Market Monitor, both annual reviews assessing progress in access to the value streams, participation of different asset classes, consumers and aggregators. And it's probably no surprise that the markets in Northwest Europe, at the end of the wires, have emerged as the early leaders in developing markets that reward flexibility and storage, or that the TSOs have delivered more value to and more access for flexibility and storage to the markets, particularly for balancing at a national level and development of ancillary services. But there is still a long way to go and inconsistencies across Europe as to the pace of implementation. And while large-scale storage has dominated the installations across Europe in the last year, that's due to the ability to participate in the existing markets almost as if they were traditional assets and not really rewarding the attributes that they can bring uniquely. Whereas for residential storage, participation in ancillary services is more costly and more difficult through aggregation. So it's more scalable through tariffs rather than ancillary services. You could say that storage begins at home. And while dynamic tariffs are starting to be available, take-up remains low, and consumers in less than half of the member states can access dynamic tariffs that reward price differentiation at different times of day. Even fewer can choose real-time pricing that really reflects the situation in the markets. And few have access to products that allow control of consumption or critical peak pricing to reward the flexibility without having to optimize themselves on a daily basis. There's also an increasing need for value stacking and accessing the multiple value streams within a retail tariff, an alignment and recognition that both tariffs and ancillary services are tools that can reward flexibility. And that's on the revenue side, but on the cost side, the issue of whether storage is generation or demand still affects the business case. It's neither generation nor demand, or perhaps it could be both. So treating merchant storage as generation levels the playing field in ancillary services. But the wide definition of energy storage complicates matters because it's not just the reconversion back into electricity, but the conversion to another energy carrier that's defined as energy storage. If energy storage is not treated as if energy storage is treated as a generator, it avoids the demand grid costs. But if the energy is being converted into hydrogen, those grid costs are not being borne by the storage facility, increasing costs to consumers. So we're already seeing inconsistent approaches, not just between countries, but also across different energy vectors. And it's increasingly clear that even if we resolve the issues of access to markets and the costs to storage, the markets themselves are becoming less appropriate, both to the emerging system needs and the capabilities of storage to provide faster response, local services, and to stack value. We're already seeing this change, both in the merchant trading of storage in intraday and day-ahead markets, and the implementation of new sub-second frequency products, particularly in GB and in the Nordics. So the implementation of the clean energy package has been both slow and inconsistent, and the defined ancillary services that we're still working towards, seen just a year or two ago as the destination, are already just a waypoint on the longer journey to bring energy storage solutions to the European market. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think you've described a well done overview of what's happening in Europe and what's driving that market. Perhaps you can allow me to ask one question. On your personal opinion, I know it's a tricky question, but what for you is the key differentiator? You show different graphs of the differences between the various countries. What would be a opportunity for countries who are, well, say lagging behind? What could be the key issue to accelerate that? You don't need to be very specific, but what could be a key driver for a national acceleration there?
So I think the key driver is to recognize the emerging system needs and not implement markets to the minimum standards. So for example, the directive defining the FCR market requires a response time of below 15 seconds. Battery storage can respond in milliseconds. The needs of the system are increasingly going to be in sub-second or millisecond markets. So there's an opportunity to implement markets to accelerate the take-up both of storage and flexibility, in recognizing that those timescales are going to be the increasing needs of the system, and develop markets for very fast-acting storage, and at the other extreme, to look at storage for long duration and how markets can be developed to give the long-term investment signals that Brittany was asking for.
So indeed, the energy transition doesn't start from a white sheet of paper and designing a new energy system, but we already have an energy system, and how can energy storage contribute to moving that into the sustainable system? Thank you, John. And I think we have one question from the group here. Helene,
yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your nice overview. I think it built nicely on the previous keynote. And one of the insights I got is that the clean energy package merely enables energy storage as an important group of technologies. However, it does little to actively advance or promote energy storage, and it leaves that mostly to market parties and possibly to national governments. Would you think that the European Commission could take a bigger role in advancing energy storage technology, other than enabling it through regulation?
I think I'd possibly answer that question in two ways. Firstly, around deployment. I think we've seen markets for storage that have been created. They've not been sustainable. They've generally been oversubscribed. And storage being one form of flexibility, I think enabling markets, encouraging markets, and encouraging wider access to markets for flexibility is the right path to deliver a technology neutral solution to flexibility needs that can support storage over the next 5 years or so. However, if we're thinking beyond just the electricity system, beyond just battery storage, then I think we do need to look at supporting research and development, looking at supporting emerging technologies that do require a different approach before they can participate in the market.
Thank you.
Brittany, would you like to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, indeed. I would just say that I would very much agree with you that the clean energy package kind of sets the minimum for storage to be able to be developed, but is not doing enough to really push and advance storage technologies. So the Commission has a task force on storage that brings together, I think, 18 directorates general. So it shows a really strong interest from the Commission side in advancing storage, but they've fallen short of really formulating clear energy storage policies. And they've really put their eggs in the baskets of hydrogen and batteries, but not the sector as a whole. So that's something that we're hoping to see next year when they come out with their staff working document on storage. We hope this will be kind of upgraded to a real comprehensive strategy, because I think it would go really far in helping to support storage deployments. But we'll see if that gets taken up.
Thanks, Brittany. And with that, I would like to take a leap into the first poll we started at the beginning. Hopefully, we've had some responses on the market. And Brittany and John, let's see if we can discuss the results with your expectations. So the question was, which countries and regions are expected to grow the most in the next 3 years? Well, we already cleaned out the most obvious markets, the German and the UK market. Well, I can read them out loud, but Brittany and John, can you share your first thoughts on these results? Can you see them? Just a check question. No, you cannot see them. Okay, so I'll read them out loud. France has scored 10%. Let me see. The Nordics 15%, Central Europe 20%, Southern Europe 25%, And Belgium and the Netherlands and Ireland scored 30%. So let's take the two extremes. France scored 10%, so the least likely to develop an energy storage market, and Belgium and the Netherlands. So already team here, we're expected to grow the quickest, and let's discuss that later on. But John, Brittany, would you like to share your thoughts on this? Brittany, go ahead.
I would say that I'm assuming that Ireland has really kind of pushed that category to win, because the Irish market has been advancing very, very quickly. I'm not sure if Belgium will be as fast. We will see, although they're doing a lot now to support behind the meter storage, for example. There are certain markets that seem to be rapidly trying to sort out storage deployments. So, for example, Poland actually in their national recovery plan have targets for storage deployment for yearly deployments and up to 2030, and they're dedicating specific funding for storage deployment. So actually some markets might come and surprise us. But John, maybe you have some more views on this.
There's certainly some regulatory changes that we are seeing emerging that are going to change the growth rates for storage. We're hearing a lot of interest from our subscribers, particularly in Belgium and the Netherlands, and issues like the removal of feed-in tariffs is likely to incentivize domestic storage to optimize self-consumption of renewables. Subsidies like the super bonus in Italy is also one of the drivers that we're seeing as supporting storage. So I think in line with what we're seeing in the poll, it is broadly spread. That there's no dominant market, but we certainly see a lot of interest in the two areas that are highest on the poll.
So indeed, the local regulation might have a significant influence, and Brittany, for example, indeed Poland might take a leap start to the front later on. And to the group here, is a response, I think, already happy that we see the Netherlands on the top, although the little scrutiny that Brittany made that Ireland might be pushing that. Do we have a first response here, or can we discuss that later on? Paulus.
Both keynotes were discussing regulations, but I think we need to discuss the issues. So, for instance, why is in the Netherlands not that much use of storage? That's because there's no market for it. And that's because, well, we didn't have that much solar, we didn't have that much wind. And now in the new plans on the regional energy strategies in the coming years, there will be a lot. So then the market changes. For instance, Belgium has this issue already, not because of the renewables, but because of some issues in the network and generation capacity. So there are market categories that are very important in order to push this market, and not just regulation. I want to add it. So if you say that the Netherlands will be a front runner, it's because we will have some trouble ahead.
And actually, troubles are always good to find solutions. So, and as Dutch, we are very good in finding solutions for troubles. So, but I'm sure we will discuss the troubles, challenges later on. So thanks for that, Paulus. Do we have another question from the audience, Rita?
There's Martijn that is asking if local regulation include tax incentives, for example, for large tech companies.
I think I want to take that question to the first session after we've started the next poll, because that's where also regulation comes into play. So Martijn, please bear with us, and I think we'll cover your question later on. Brittany and John, thank you very much, and please stay on the line and join us in the in the 4 sessions following up to look at the Dutch situations and where we see troubles, opportunities, challenges, and where and how we can solve that. But before we go to the speakers here in the studio here, Linda, we have a next poll. I think it's already opened, so we'll open it right now. Can you expand a little bit on our next poll?
Yeah, so this is more actually, the first one was more related to what John was talking about, the markets. This one more what Brittany has been talking about. What measures can we take in Europe to create the market, to stimulate the market for storage? So this is a set of questions relating to which activity do you see are most urgent or should be at the priority list to take action on in the EU. So take your time in answering. We will come back to the results of this later again.
And again, it's about action, and today is all about action. Where and how can we move this forward? So also please take action to fill in the poll so that we know what needs to be done and we can focus on the actions. Again, John, Brittany, thank you very much. We're now moving into the next phase of today's webinar, and I would like to ask the first group to join us to discuss grid management in the Netherlands. And Diederik, I think you're looking forward to share some of the thoughts and observations your team has made towards energy storage.
Yeah, sure.
The presentation. We decided that the best way is to say next slide, because there is a clicker, but of course we can't hand it from one person to the other.
We'll manage. Okay, great. So over the last, I think, month and a half, we've been working in 4 working groups on different cases on how to create some impact on this. I've been put forward sort of spokesperson of this group to talk about the grids and the regulations. My name is Diederik Apotheker. I work for InvestNL, is our national promotional institute. That's sort of what this category of government funds is called in the European context. So what we have looked into here is to see where are actually all these opportunities, and can we find some high impact, low effort contributions to unlocking it. I think the next group, they will show this and go deeper into the specific examples of where you can actually create these opportunities, but where it maybe in the end it comes down to is the sort of the relation to infrastructure and how we can benefit from it. I mean, infrastructure is it's an asset which is quite slow to grow. It's quite costly to do it. And so if you turn that around, you can see there's an opportunity arising if you can use flex and flex related business models to do it faster and cheaper. And in the meantime, create some opportunities for our industry and small to medium enterprises. So what are we looking at here? So how can we actually support this, and how can we find those high impact, low efforts? Also, if you go to the next one, we can see basically a snapshot of our Dutch situation at this moment. We're seeing in this ecosystem that the growth of renewables is actually faster than the infrastructure can keep up with, creating some bottlenecks in our system. So the main growth is from wind and solar, but there's also some things on the horizon which are actually quite short on the horizon. So the electrification further of our transport system, introduction of hydrogen, the electrification of heat, both in our homes and in our industries. And so there's it's not over yet, and already we can see a large part of our country coloring red, meaning that these are areas of our grid where it's not longer possible to add new capacities. So using this infrastructure more efficiently creates lots of opportunities, and you can also see that it speeds up the energy transition if we're able to put some of those yellow and red areas onto green again. So as we've seen from the previous speakers, that's not really easy. So that's on the next slide. We have a list of the barriers. The stakeholder field is pretty wide and complex. So there's many parties in it. There's also a lot of initiatives already ongoing to discuss this topic, and it could require indeed further legal and regulatory updates. So we've seen that the European legislation needs to be implemented here, and there's new legislation coming, needs again to be implemented. And in the meantime, we have already our local, or say Dutch existing legal and regulatory frameworks and working groups and stakeholder groups and interest groups all represented there. So it is a quite complex field to actually change something. So in this, we were looking for some actions, right? So what could we actually do? And maybe that would get a bit detailed, but on the next slide, we would post them. And I would also really ask my working group members to also join maybe in taking questions or explaining these actions further. But the first thing that we saw is this diversity of markets reduces costs, has the potential to reduce the cost for financing. One of the barriers in these assets is that in the growth of these storage assets, it can be quite hard to get them financed. They are exposed to a lot of risk. This term was mentioned for it of the revenue stacking. So you try to get from a diversity of markets, you try to stack up these revenues. It increases complexity, but it also reduces the risk a bit because you're not dependent on one market. So I think that is something that we need to keep in mind when we are from the Netherlands perspective, designing these policies, that if you actually are able to generate more certainty in cash flow, the whole financing operation, the whole asset itself, the cost of storage will go down. The second point is also a really key one. Our grids are designed for peak power. It is also a legal obligation to get that done. But if we are able to find a set of rules and regulations that we can avoid that, it will lead to really significant cost reductions and speeding up and making a better use of the infrastructure that we already have on the ground today. And the third point, which we saw on this, also on the map of the previous slides, it was also mentioned in one of these other presentations, is local congestion markets. By adding more transparency on actual liquidity requirement. Maybe one more entry into this topic. Congestion markets is an option that can be added to put one of those red areas into yellow or green. But to actually do it, you have to have some liquidity in this market. So the grid operator needs to trust that there is sufficient supply and demand of the flexibility in that area. Are their companies able to ramp up their production or ramp it down or increase their consumption or decrease their consumption, whatever the grid situation at that time requires? Are there sufficient of those potential suppliers of flex in the area? Now, a lot of these areas remain red because there's not sufficient of them. Should you, however, turn it around and say we need at least 10 megawatts in 5 different parties, for example, if that kind of transparency would be added, you could incentivize entrepreneurs to actually offer that liquidity to that local market and thereby change it from red to yellow or hopefully even green again. So how would we propose to do this and get this all further? Since it's such a wide group, and it's really a system innovation question that we're facing, we concluded on a method using design sessions, where in a relatively small group, you can keep your momentum and propose new solutions. It's a bit outside the system of the current interest groups, see if there is any conventions or barriers that we need to tackle with this different perspective. Yeah,
thank you.
with that I'd like to conclude.
Thierry. And with that, I mean, you look at it from a background of the investments, and I would like to take the opportunity to challenge perhaps Paulus. You already made the remark that in the Netherlands we might face some issues coming from a DSO. Can you give an example on what is happening and where do you see these challenges already happening now?
Yeah, well, Diederik showed the congestion map, which is the Netherlands and all these red colors. Congestion means that we have a closure for new connections. And most people think that it's because we need to find the resources to add that connection, but it's not just that. And if you look at this day, there's no wind, but there's a lot of sun. And if the sun shines and you have a lot of PV panels on the roof or in the fields, well, it shines everywhere, which means that it's not just at the connection or at the area around it. It's like adding up much more. And so one of the major issues, and this is for solar, and the same happens for heating. And so we have a network that has been built in the last 100 years for all kinds of different users. But these new users for heat pumps, for solar panels, for wind, they tend to be all the same. And they do everything at exactly the same moment. So it's, if you compare it to roads, we have a highway, we have mid roads and small roads. And if you start using them all at the same time, there's a traffic jam. And in the same way, we have these traffic jams just because they come all at the same time. If you come at a different time, there's plenty of space. So this is the issue. There is plenty of space, but not at the same time. Not everybody at the same time, please. So, for instance, we can look at these markets and the stacking of revenues, as Diederik calls it. So adding up all these different potentials, and frequency response is one of the things TSO offers in a market, but this is just a tiny one. And another one for storage is clear that, well, there's, because of this wind and sun, and as I mentioned, we don't have that much yet in the Netherlands, this renewable power, but it will grow rapidly in the coming 10 years. So after 10 years, it will be so much that I think the price will be more about the time of usage, because well, now we have a volume price. You use energy, you pay for the volume, but in 5 to 10 years, you will pay for the moment of usage, because there's a lot at some moments, and there's a shortage at other moments. So this is the time difference and the price difference. So this is one part of the market. The other part of the market is, well, the capacity related. And of course, it can be very easy. If we say, instead of putting all the solar panels to the south, you can also say put on east-west and add a battery, problem solved. No market, problem solved. Market for those who sell. So maybe that's the easiest one. Just make it that easy. But stacking these business cases for all these other options must be examined too. And so this is already happening. So if, for instance, if you put this solar in a different way and you have a different profile, you can add much faster already. So these changes are happening. And what we've been doing in the last years, we saw this coming, and we opened all kinds of flexibility markets, like the access to a congestion market, like the intraday and the day ahead, also for smaller packages. So this is what we've been doing in the last few years, but it's not enough. As you can see, it's still turning out.
And from a DSO perspective, you see the challenge coming and you want to be prepared and looking at the various options.
We were prepared, but it's not working. So yeah, we need to do something different.
Yeah, and hence the call to action that you can't continue to build to peak.
And maybe just a simple change in regulation, put the solar panels not to the south, but to the east-west, and add a battery. Ta-da!
Bob's your uncle, and then you can move forward. Excellent. And thanks, Paulus. I would like to, let's see, because I think we have one of your team members online. Kjell, are you there? Because I would like to learn we've learned from Paulus about the challenges, but it's good to also see what the market is already doing. And I know we have a challenge now, but I'm willing to try that. Looking.
Annega in the list. We know he was called into an urgent meeting with the regulator. So
do we have him online?
Sure if he was able to make it.
Otherwise, I think I saw it, Kel, but otherwise we'll skip that question and move on to the electric mobility stage. Diederik, thank you very much. And we will be coming back to you on the specific call to action later on during the session. Okay. But thank you very much. Okay, and now I would like to ask Marnix and your team to join us here and discuss the opportunities for electric mobility.
Thank you.
Go over by, yeah.
Thanks for inviting me, and it's really cool to be actually able to go to a physical location as a speaker for now. Please could you present the slides for me to start? As an introduction, my name is Marnix. I work at PowerD, and PowerD is a platform company for smart charging. So we try to monetize the value of EV flexibility in a European fleet. And that's what I'm going to talk about as well today, the electric mobility case and integration of electric mobility into the grid. And it's really great that it's been mentioned as well in both the keynote speakers that the electric mobility integration is one of the topics that is important in storage. So I'm not going into the details again of why this is, because we have very little time for this session. So basically, the electric vehicle is a battery on wheels, and we could utilize this battery in time to go into what Paulus just mentioned. We cannot make use of the grid at the same time, and the entrepreneurs that are working in this field, they are really struggling with finding a valuable business case. And what is also mentioned before today is that the stacking of the different markets and different business cases is very important to make sure that you can go forward with your products. But which party could monetize this value? This is really a difficult question right now. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. We'll take a look at the ecosystem. And it's very interesting what is going on right now, where the automotive sector, OEMs, leasing companies, car sharing, etc., and the power sector, like grid operators, energy suppliers, and aggregators, they are moving into the same dynamics. Where how we call it the e-mobility sector arises, which is, for example, charge point operators, e-mobility service providers, and smart charging providers. And there is some changes going on where large and small companies are trying to figure out what is my role in this value chain, and they're all struggling to find this business case. So before we continue, I want to structure it on the 3 different locations to charge an electric vehicle, which is at home, where we see installation of private charge points coming up. Semi-public, which is, for example, at offices or parking lots, and the public environment, which is mostly on-street charging. So if we go to the next slide, we have defined as a working group 3 different barriers. The first one is difficult access to energy markets for flexibility providers. We have mentioned it already before today. That this is an issue, that the markets are not always aligned, and the stacking of those markets is difficult. No time of use trigger for the DSO capacity cost. So this is built on the old system as described in one of the slides of John, where it's based on basically a profiled neighborhood of electricity demand. And now we are changing, and this capacity cost is not built for the future. And on the public side, it is a monopoly due to integrated offers by the charge point operator. So this is also an interesting point. The charge point operator is the one that is spending a lot of money to put the infrastructure there, but is forced now to earn on selling of kilowatt hours. So this brings us to the next slide, where we have a call to action to finalize this short pitch. We have some examples in the Netherlands that are pretty cool. And we believe that with a push in EU legislation, we could help Dutch entrepreneurs to implement and grow and export their technology and export their knowledge to different markets in Europe. So how should we do this? I think to summarize, there is an initiative in the Netherlands based on the national agenda of charging infrastructure with a working group, Smart Charging. We discussed just now the task force that was mentioned before is maybe a better way of describing it. But we need a task force on a European level to take on these barriers we just mentioned. And to mention them again, first one, allow drivers to contract a different energy supplier on their charge point, so we can split the demand of the household and the demand of the vehicle. Change the DSO capacity pricing model towards a time-dependent flexible rate, because this will force the shift in time, as mentioned, and split the infrastructure and electricity compensation in public charging, because it will help to create these new innovative business models we need. So yeah, I think that's the introduction, and I think it will be nice to go to some questions.
Well, I have one. I mean, I drive an electric vehicle, so I'm a consumer. What would this mean for me? Where do I come in?
Maybe that's interesting to ask Zubin to come forward, because he has the perspective of the end user.
That's a very interesting question. What we are seeing is that the energy landscape is changing, and you as a consumer, or I as a consumer, you have an electric vehicle that can maybe put power back in the grid. I might have a solar panel on my roof, which might also contribute to the grid. And so these are sort of flexibility services that we can provide to the grid. So yeah, I mean, to answer your specific question, I mean, the market is changing. The consumer who is a consumer is different. We are becoming more active as consumers. But to answer your specific question on what could you be offered, I think it could be that when you charge, when you offer your power back to the grid, to the electricity grid during off-peak hours or during peak hours, you should be compensated well for it. And if you don't charge it during peak hours, then you should also pay less for it. So these kind of incentives and disincentives to reduce the congestion on the grid would be a good step.
Cheaper and greener.
Yes.
Cheaper and greener. But Helene, may I ask you that? How do we ensure that that actually works properly? Because
yeah, that's a fair question, because whatever you do not want to make things more complicated or obstruct anything. It's good to bear in mind that flexibility has several purposes, right? TenneT needs to ensure that the frequency on our grid is constant. There are parties that are responsible for keeping an eye on the balance between supply and demand that needs to be balanced. And thirdly, you want to ensure that charging or discharging electric vehicles will not lead to additional congestion on the grid. So those things you need to keep in mind. So before charging or decharging cars, you would need to check each of these things. What are the implications for net balance? What are the implications for portfolio balance? So between supply and demand of electricity, what are the implications for local congestions? And fourthly, also, does the owner of the car agree? So those things, those checks all need to be there before you can proceed. And if not, you may need to wait. So those no-goes, those red flags, you need to keep an eye on. And what has been highlighted before already, it needs to be attractive for all players, all stakeholders to participate in this model. So there needs to be something in it for everyone, and that when it comes to value stacking or allocating value, that is something that needs to be kept in mind, I think. Yeah.
And you mentioned, I mean, you work for the Dutch TSO. I'm a Dutch driver, but the holiday season is coming up. I tend to spend some time every now and then in Brussels. We already learned about the EU thoughts. Marnix, I mean, I am a Dutch driver, looking forward to go on holidays with my electric vehicle, and I work for an international company. Why is it important to move from a Dutch perspective to a European perspective here?
I think it's a good question. Representing different Dutch entrepreneurs in the ecosystem today, I think we also call out for other companies to join and contact us via this platform today to try to have this discussion and figure it out. But from my perspective, it's about interoperability of the protocols and about the transparency of the markets, which is two things that could help businesses to be able to bring a similar product to different European countries. And it's really important to use the scale of Europe here to make sure that we can compete as well.
So I can travel through Europe with one single charge pass from mobility service provider, charge wherever I go, and have the same product valid throughout Europe.
Exactly.
So that's where the value is.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Looking at the time, we've covered now the electromobility. Marnix, Helene, Subin, thank you very much. I would like to ask the group for industrial electrification, Paul, Rob, to expand a bit on where energy storage can contribute to industrial electrification. No. No. So I think, Rob, you will first set the scene on what it is we're talking about.
Yeah.
today.
So, well, first of all, I would say this has been a team effort, and so on behalf of Helene, Guido, Stefan, we're very happy that Rob has joined us. He flew in as Superman to help us out explaining and setting the stage for industrial electrification. So my name is Paul Vosbeek, President and CEO of Quintic Energy, and we're going to talk to you about industrial electrification. So if we can, well, Rob, if you can look at the next slide and speak to it.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Can I take this mic? Yeah. My name is Rob Krijter, Director for Energy and Industry at the Top Sector Energy, Dutch government initiative on basically public-private partnership on innovation. I had also the electrification roadmap that's currently in development in the Netherlands for industry. A few words on industry, because we basically zoom out to a different sector, different scale. When I say industry, I mean process industry, so really the large energy intensive and CO2 intensive industries in the Netherlands. Well, they're a user of energy, but they can also play an active role in the energy system of the future. And I think part of the discussion will be on that. Large in share of the total energy use, about a third in the Netherlands, and most of that is in the form of heat, and well, relatively large share high temperature heat. So that's quite a challenge to make that CO2 free, to electrify that energy demand. Well, if we take into account the feedstock, for instance, in the form of hydrogen, but also coal for steel industry, and we move to different ways of steel making, different ways of fertilizer industry, then that really adds up to a massive electricity demand. Well, in CO2 numbers, more than 40% of national CO2 emissions is industry in the Netherlands. But we've been working on technical potential for electrification, for instance, and that would easily add up to 130 terawatt hours of electricity demand annually, which is more than the current total electricity demand in the Netherlands. So we could easily double that figure going to electrification in industry. Next slide, please. So that poses quite a challenge. Well, on the left, you see the ecosystem relevant for that. Basically, the three main ways of electrification in industry is power to heat. So e-boilers, electric ovens, furnaces, power to chemicals, direct electrochemistry, and of course, power to hydrogen, or, well, as it is often called, power to gas, electrolysis technology. It's not only a matter of generation and demand. Of course, the infrastructure is of vital demand, of vital importance here, because all of that electricity needs to be produced somewhere where it's often not used. It needs to be transported to industry clusters and fed into processes. And the other is, of course, say the man in the middle, storage, or better said, it's actually flexible backup or dispatchable generation. And that flexibility can be introduced into the industrial processes itself. It can be there as a service for industry in the form of storage, or of course it can be coupled to the generation. And as of yet, it's undecided where in the system that flexibility needs to be placed. I think it's one of the points for discussion here, where that would be most valid. And of course, demand response in industry could be a cost-effective target. Well, if you look at the top right, well, you probably cannot see the exact text there, but it's basically is a first estimate of what technology will be at scale at what year. So short term, we have electric boilers for hybrid operation, highly flexible, adding up to well, 6 to 8 gigawatts of total power capacity in the Netherlands. Other forms of electrification, highly efficient in the form of heat pumps in industry. Electrolysis will follow next. And in the long term, we will also be able to electrify, for instance, cracker furnaces, high temperature ovens in glass industry, and eventually even the steel industry could be fully electrified via electric reduction or reduction with hydrogen. So it's a mix of direct electrification and indirect electrification. Well, like I said, the key issue here is how to couple variable renewables to an industry that's by nature baseload demand, and that's well, it's against current culture, against the current focus of industry. So apart from the technical challenges, I think we have a cultural and a regulatory barrier as well. With that, I think I can hand over to Helene. Next slide, please.
Yes, thank you.
To the barriers.
Thank you, Rob. I think Rob rightly points out that industrial flexibility is not only about energy storage, it's also about demand response. It's also about the electrification of the ongoing and upcoming heat transition in industry. The question, however, is why is this so complicated, and what barriers, to use the word again, need to be overcome? I work at Tenet looking into these issues. One of the barriers frequently mentioned for energy storage is the double taxation. I chose not to list it here simply because it is currently addressed. The Dutch lower house has picked it up. The Dutch government is looking into it and will come with a proposal. But there are other things. And another issue that has been known for several years already relates to the tariffs that are used for using the grid. There are a number of bottlenecks there, and an important one for disclosing energy storage potentials is that it is costly now to temporarily use more electricity than what has been contractually agreed. This makes it very costly to operate batteries and is frequently mentioned as a barrier. Something else is that large energy consumers get a discount on their tariffs, and that clearly makes it more complicated to provide incentives through the tariffs for a more flexible electricity demand. And producers of electricity do not pay for using the grid. So all these issues need to be addressed, preferably in coherence, because altogether they need to cover the costs for operating the grid. Related to this is the viability of business cases for energy storage and other industrial flex more in general. Few industries have a full comprehensive understanding of business cases of various flexibility options, not only today, but also towards 2030, as electricity prices will become more volatile and CO2 price will increase up to €100 per ton in 2030. It is very important that we get a much better understanding of those business cases. Thirdly, congestion is an issue. Many industries are concerned about the capacity of the grid. You need to be sure that there's sufficient capacity before you make that investment into electrification. And there is, that's definitely something that grid operators together with industry need to talk about and give that comfort on both sides to move ahead with, on the one hand, the electrification, and on the other hand, investments in the grid. And then there's this final issue of cybersecurity, which cross-cuts almost all fields. Wherever equipment and appliances are connected through the internet, we have this this risk that data is not protected. And also this is something that poses a challenge. And this brings me to the next slide.
Okay. So this, thank you, Helene, thank you, Rob. So this brings us to our calls to action, which I would like to kind of divvy up between me and my brother in arms, Guido. So maybe you take away the first one, Guido.
Yeah. Our call to action from this group is that the government has to chip away, as it says here, the barriers to transform the energy system, to make sure that that there are incentives or mechanisms to adopt storage technology for all kind of market mechanisms. Of course, we need to provide clarity and ensure that the companies understand their options and how they can participate in this. What are the cost benefits? What are the analysis? Is the market going to? And at company, at industrial park level, but even on a larger scale. So I think together with Paul, we are here as representing companies providing storage solutions. I think the technologies are there to do it. They are available, but we need the incentives from the market to take the next step to make sure that adoption of storage is also profitable. It's really becoming a business case so that the market pool comes. And maybe you want to take the last points, Paul?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we definitely need to look at is how we can include flexibility in the business cases for industrial electrification. And it's actually going to be one of the tangible recommendations we have is to introduce a flex cam. We'll talk about that later in the closing round. But also, of course, since this is a European platform, we would like to promote the idea of aligning European and national laws and regulations to support what we call long-term economic and technical lifetime solutions, which are not dependent on international geopolitical supply chains. So we don't move from an OPEC into a LIPEC. So with that, I think we come to the conclusion of this working group. Thank you so much.
And I would like to reflect on that immediately, because if I listen to Rob and Helene, the electricity system and with the industrial electrification, the numbers are huge. And you both represent a different storage technology. So Paul, I will come back to you later. But Guido, can you expand a bit on what does it mean? Energy storage, industrial, what are we talking about?
Yeah. We once made a quick and dirty analysis of what kind of capacities would be required to reach a carbon-free electricity supply, and we reached the number of 500 terawatt hours worldwide. That's a huge number. It can be plus or minus whatever percentage, but this is the order of magnitude that we look at. The immediate applications are, of course, together with PV fields, with wind turbines. That's the kind of technology that my company develops. And in that respect, storage is actually an add-on to a large generation. But we could also look at it from a different point of view. I think a lot of people today consider wind and sun generation as the replacement of fossil power plants. But you could also say that actually wind and sun generation is replacing the fossil fuels, so the oil and the gas. And eventually, we made a thorough analysis of that, of where the world would be heading. We will need massive storage capacities, as I just mentioned, in the range of hundreds of terawatt hours. And so if you would look at the wind and power generation replacing the fossil fuels, then you could look at a battery eventually in the long-term future as the replacement of a fossil power plant.
So that's the size and the volume we're talking about. That it's not nowadays we know a power plant, and probably the perception now is a battery could be a electric vehicle that size, but we're really looking at the size of power plants, that kind of energy volumes. Okay.
Yeah, you could look at it at the battery as a bidirectional power plant.
Okay, and, bidirectional power plant.
That's a really nice word. I would like to to mention.
So that kind of volume.
Yeah, okay, and so it could replace gas peaking power plants. It's actually it's not only an idea. It's actually happening in the US. There is a big project of a 300 megawatt hour, 1.2 gigawatt hour peaking power plant that is replaced by a battery.
Okay.
Okay. So that could be the end game. That's how we believe.
Yeah. So we're really looking at volumes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Guido. And Paul, I promise to come back to you as well,
sure,
because I know you have a very different technology than Guido. Guido is representing the big volumes, but can you expand shortly on the contributions that your technology can bring to the system?
Yeah. I always describe Guido's flow battery as kind of an ever expandable lake of energy that you can continue to grow. And on the opposite side of that scale is what we have. It's a shock absorber that you can beat up and down unlimited in terms of power peak volumes. And so that's what we provide. And just a very quick example is we've just worked through a business case for a container terminal where it showed that if you would apply a flywheel to a container lifting hoisting mechanism, and instead of just lifting it and lowering it, if you would store that energy and balance it out with the flywheel, you could save about 50% on the grid connection, on the grid usage. So that, of course, is a different business case. It's all about the other side of the spectrum. But as industrial electrification grows, we're going to see a lot of these power surges and peaks occurring. And so in the end, the answer is not a single solution to solve this or to move forward. It's a smart combination, a hybridized combination of different solutions and technologies to make the whole thing work. So that's what we think. Yeah.
I know I'm eating out on the Q&A at the end, but I know we have the volume storage. We know we have the capacities, but Rob and Elaine, you mentioned the grid tariffs. And can you very quickly respond on why is it so difficult and what can we do to actually look and change those grid tariffs? It's a very big and challenging question. I'm asking you to do it very concise. So, Rob, may I invite you?
Industry perspective first, maybe, and then the response from Tenet. Well, the key issue is that the grid tariff is felt now as a punishment for taking up a power peak, which was, of course, very effective. I mean, it was a perfect means of making sure that the system was not overloaded and stayed alive. In the new world where we focus on flexibility and we actually need that flexibility, you don't want a penalty on eating up a power peak. You want basically a premium on eating up that power peak. Tricky bit is, but Helene can respond to that. As soon as you change one component in the tariff system, everything changes, of course, because the overall bill stays the same or even grows to the future. So, Helene, over to you.
Well, I could not phrase it better. I think that's exactly it. Yeah, it needs to be a coherent structure, and costs need to be covered. So, and apart from that, it's important that grid operators agree on this. Stakeholders will have a say as well. So if grid operators together come with a position to the regulatory authority, the ACM will be interested in how stakeholders perceive this. And since one of the bottlenecks is also the discount for large volume users, you can imagine that that's not an easy thing to change. So it's a complex puzzle and work in progress, definitely. Yeah.
And hence also the call to actions. And I know Paul at the end will come back to the call to actions as well. And now we're running a little bit late, so thank you all for participating. And we're moving to the final team. Stefan, may I ask you to logistically see your way down? And we're moving to the final session on the built environment. And we do.
Noor wants to ask a question.
Let me see.
Herself.
Let's go ahead. Let's take a question.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm really, really happy to get the opportunity to ask this question. So thank you very much. And thank you for this amazing discussion. So my question would be about the flexibility of policies that you spoke about when taking real actions and measures. We know that governments in general do change. And of course, they don't have the same ideologies or even the same path in how they imagine the future in a more sustainable way. So how can we guarantee that even though despite the transitions, the political transitions that any kind of democracy sort of lives, that we can maintain a program that is going to be sustainable and that is going to be coherent, especially coherence? Thank you very much.
Very nice question, and I think you're touching upon a very delicate issue there. The time span of a government in conjunction with the time span of the energy transition. I think it would be very difficult to answer that, but at the same time we see different activities. For example, the agenda verdict in the Netherlands, where a government is actually held to the Paris Agreement. So we do see certain longer-term agreements taking place there. I don't know if there's somebody from the team who wants to respond.
Is still,
sorry?
Is Brittany still in the meeting?
Brittany, are you still in the meeting?
No, because she did have to leave.
No. Yeah, I think she had another appointment. I think you're touching on a very important point, which I propose to continue at a separate time, because I think there's a lot to discuss there. Sure. And perhaps, Linda, we can even host a separate entire day meeting on that. So, an excellent question and food for thought. But I propose to take that separately at a different meeting.
Then I need to take part in the next meeting for sure.
You're definitely invited.
Thank you very much. I don't want to make it long for other questions. Thank you.
No, don't worry. Stefan, urban environment, another application of energy storage. I think you have one of your team members on the webcam. Eileen, are you there? Yeah, there. I hope you can see. You're a member of the Greek Business Club. Can you expand a little bit on that? And with respect to energy storage, how does a business club come to energy storage?
Yes, I can. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, well, actually, you can see us as a living lab, as we are a network of 14 business districts in the Netherlands, where the stakeholders in those districts are connected in a local green business club. And well, they work together on making the district more sustainable. And not only by talking about sustainability, of course, it starts with sharing knowledge, but they really want to do stuff. So they focus on concrete projects. Yeah, and different goals, this integral program. So they work on zero emission city logistics, on zero waste, transport, but of course also on an energy transition. More and more districts are focusing on making those districts energy neutral in 2030 or 2035. So that's one big ambition, and we need the knowledge. I hear already about.
What is your key driver to go energy sufficient, self-sufficient?
Well,
what kind of companies? What is the key driver there?
Yeah, well, the network is very diverse, so you must think about tenants, some tenants of single-tenant buildings, but also multi-tenant buildings, landlords, property managers, municipalities, knowledge institutions, and they have all their own reasons, of course, to work on those sustainable goals. Corporate social corporate responsibility, but also the legislation, regulations, saving money. And if you're looking at the energy ambition, it starts all with saving energy and try to generate renewable energy. But then there comes the hardest part, and that's well, you're already talking about. Yeah.
Energy storage. So what do you need?
What we need, yeah. Well, what we need is knowledge, of course, and business cases to come to the possible solution. I must say, lots of the areas are still investigating the possibilities. We have one area in the west of Amsterdam, Sloterdijk. Also, Alliander is one of the participants there with a new building. And we started an investigation there, a research for how to make that whole area energy neutral. And then at the end, we need all the knowledge partners to help us to create business cases, which will make it a smart district.
So I like the expression of green business club as you're talking about the built environment, but at the end it definitely needs to be supported and sustainable by businesses. So just a check question, in your network, is any green business club already using energy storage?
Not on a district scale. Well, we work together also with one big business district. It's not a real green business club, but we connected to each other, and they I can't say the name yet. They're gonna launch their big project in December, but it's a business park of 350 hectares, and they're working on a large smart grid with large batteries for the short peak moments, and that's a really interesting case, and we're going to learn from them. But yeah, the reason why I'm here, I really want to ask you, see us as a living lab. We need the pilots, we need your knowledge, and I hope we can find each other to do great stuff, because we want to, and we can connect all those stakeholders. We can help you to connect them to you. So that's basically why I'm here, and what my call to action is.
Excellent. And Eileen, of course, there's not a coincidence that I'm being joined by Stefan, who is running our Energy Storage NL organization. You asked for expertise and knowledge, so here we have it, visualized by Stefan. But Stefan, can you expand a little bit for those who don't know Energy Storage NL? What is it? What do we do?
Sure. Thank you, Yillis. Yeah, Energy Storage NL is the Dutch Industry Association for the energy storage industry. We represent over 80 organizations working in the field of energy storage. These are technology developers, energy companies, project developers, DSOs, and we bring them together and we offer them a platform for networking and knowledge sharing, and we advocate on behalf of the Dutch energy storage industry.
Yeah, so you're covering the entire expertise requirements that Eileen has. So perhaps you can already help her by expanding a bit on what's already available in the Netherlands in the built environment.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not that much yet. We are lacking the incentives for storing energy in the built environment. However, we do see some applications popping up in recent years. One of the applications that Eline mentioned, behind the meter peak shaving of peaking electrical loads is one of the business cases that is starting to become more interesting. Also to reduce the transport fees that Helene mentioned earlier. That is an interesting case that's coming along. Another interesting application of energy storage that I'd like to mention is thermal energy storage. It's an energy storage technology that's often overlooked, but especially in office buildings, there's a lot of residual heat during the summer when the air conditioning units are running, and during the winter there's a heat demand. And when you shift the available heat from summer to winter, you can use that to reduce the energy demand. And luckily, a lot of office buildings are already doing this by using aquifer thermal energy storage systems, but there's also more new thermal energy storage technologies coming on the market right now, which could be used for this application.
Yeah. So building on that, Eileen is asking for, okay, with expertise, you mentioned there are various technologies, but you also said that there is very limited application. We've seen it in the market, Scout. Netherlands is very promising, but it's not happening yet. What are, in your perspective, the key barriers there?
Yeah, a lot of them have already been mentioned in the previous session. So, for instance, we see a double taxation issue coming along with energy storage systems. Also, the grid tariffs can either be a maker or a breaker for the business case in the commercial and industrial segment, and also in the built environment. But with what is especially hampering the development of energy storage in the built environment is the net metering scheme that we have in the Netherlands, where you can balance the amount of energy that you take from the grid to what you feed into to the grid. So that really removes all incentives of using as much of the energy that you generate yourself.
Yeah, so and there is no point in putting energy there.
And of course, the clean energy package has opened up the opportunity for consumers to become more active and for small and medium enterprises to become more active on the energy markets, maybe through aggregation. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that implemented in the Netherlands yet.
And that brings us back to one of the remarks made by Brittany at the beginning, that there's already been done a lot in Brussels, but it needs to be implemented on the national level as well.
Yeah.
And that's where energy storage.
That's what we try to advocate for, indeed. Yeah, and we also try to show what is already available and what can already be done. And of course, there are already some very interesting applications of also behind the meter batteries that are being used to reduce the loads on the grid. But would be great if that would be incentivized as well, either through tariffs or subsidies, to make that possible and to help energy storage to make the energy transition possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Stefan. And what I would like to do now is ask, we'll be looking at the Q&A, but I would also like Marnix, Paul, and Diederik to join me. Because what we've seen is that we've heard the description of the situation, the description, the barriers. But what I would like to do as a closure of today is make this very explicit. We want to speed up the energy transition. We want to make sure that energy storage has a role to play, and for Dutch companies to bring those opportunities to market to make a sustainable business. So to close this meeting, I would like to ask each and every representative of the four work streams to provide the audience with a very concise description of who what kind of organization, and specifically, preferably a person, needs to do what, by when, to ensure that that business of energy storage is able to take off in the Netherlands, so that we actually have a call to action and a takeaway for today's meeting. So who wants to go first? Diederik, you had the longest time to think about it.
No, but I would say, yes, it feels a bit. I would rather say to look at myself, what I can do, rather than to put it at someone else. Right? You phrase it like this. So, what can you somewhere out there do? No. Rather, I would say, well, what can I do actually? If you don't mind taking that question a bit in a different direction. No, I think there is one of the challenges is that there are so many things that we can do, and the system change is really a long trajectory to change everything here. So I think rather the challenge to any of us is to look to how to break that down in small steps. So what can you do today that contributes to this longer effort? And so just for myself or for our working groups here, I would think that is that's the challenge, to find the small steps which we can take tomorrow and what we should focus on. And then very concretely, what is that about? I think it is also for me in InvestNL, I have two things I can do. I can search for and connect with companies who look for growth capital and see if there is somehow a fit can be made. And the second thing is that we can launch projects to develop this market. And so there are several ideas for that. Maybe one of them, opening up this congestion management liquidity barrier, right? Yeah. So one of the dangers of mentioning something very specific is this is quite detailed, but I think that would be one of the key things that we could do short term.
Excellent, yeah? Diederik, really appreciate it. So make sure you keep track of the communication lines. Marnix, can you expand a bit on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking this question, because if we take a look at what we have done in the past couple of months to prepare, I think it was the most important question for us to figure out. What is the call to action? How are we actually going to set things in motion? From my perspective, looking into the e-mobility case, my call to action would be to the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate. We have this working group, Smart Charging, based on the national agenda charging infrastructure in the Netherlands. And it's really representing our ecosystem to take away the barriers that are in the markets in the Netherlands right now. And my call to action would be help us to set up a European similar structure. I've heard in the first that there is an energy storage task force. Maybe we can find a way to twist it, bend it, or merge it into something looking into smart charging specifically.
So you identified your short-term opportunity.
Exactly.
Excellent. Paul, be concise.
Yeah, so Yillis, yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give it to you still at a high over. So as you know, in order to move energy storage forward, we need economies of scale. In order for economies of scale, we need large-scale adoption. For large-scale adoption, we need to entice and advance the market to support that and incentivize that. And that will bring the price of storage down to a level that the market can bear. That said, a very tangible takeaway that I would like to give is to offer these companies and industries the opportunity for a flex scan. Very much like we had in the old days, where you had a renewable energy scan or an energy efficiency scan. Let's offer, let's RVO, our Dutch Enterprise Agency, come up before the end of the year with a little program that incentivize and pushes companies to deploy in flex scan. And if we then aggregate all that data from those flex scans, we also have a more granular view of where congestion, flexibility, and everything is possible. So that would be my tangible one.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Paul. Stefan.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I'll be very concise. In the energy storage industry, we've seen a lot of technical innovation, we've seen a lot of business model innovation, and now it's time for legislative innovation. So we need to experiment with different types of legislation to make this all possible.
Excellent. Concise, clear. Thank you very much. Linda, we're running out of time, but
yes. No, I just had to laugh because at the beginning we said don't hit the table because production goes deaf. Of course, one did it. Yeah, we're running out of time, but we do have the last poll to show, the results from the last poll, the second poll rather, so we can show the results. This was the question: where do you see action is most needed at the European policymaker level? So we have the results here. Right. So I think, okay, so support for private financing of storage projects is the highest at 37%.
So Diederik, that's where you come in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It says define it in the sustainable finance taxonomy. So I think it's a categorization.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's in the taxonomy. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work going on there.
Taxonomy, yeah.
So it should be in it.
Yeah. It's in the energy storage is in the taxonomy.
Yeah. So that's seen as the highest priority.
Well, if I may respond to that, but again, next to the remark made earlier that it's about the shorter term government vision towards the longer term energy transition. This is one of the things that the European Commission is really leading on, the taxonomy for sustainable finance. And that again is something we can spend a lot of time on. But Stefan, I think you've been working with amongst others Brittany on that, and energy storage is actually within the taxonomy. So yes, please come back to us if you have any specific questions on that.
And then the second one is this comprehensive EU and national strategies to support storage rollout, even more than definition of storage targets, which is not voted for at all. That point actually ties in very nicely with our overall call to action.
Yep.
Which, do you want to? We have one overall, and it's been mentioned several times today. The word task force has come up a couple of times. And I think this joining forces and working together on it is clearly seen as one of the enabling factors.
Yeah, I think the overall call out indeed is that with this group we've been working on the various topics. The government has been mentioned, so our overall call out is indeed to bring this into practice. We've learned about knowledge sharing. We've learned about the concise, we've identified the bottlenecks, but now it is indeed to move this forward where industry has a role to play, the network operators has a role to play, and the government has a role to play. And that is something we're really looking forward to together move this forward. And well, I've asked for specific concrete calls to action, to specific actions. And that's our call to action indeed, also to the government, to bring this forward, to make sure that as a Dutch organizations, we can make a sustainable business here.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's good to expand a little bit on how we bring this this forward, what the next steps of this group will be.
Yeah. So thanks very much. Thanks, Brittany and John, although they are no longer in the meeting, and especially the people here in the room. And I see that Gjalt has joined us late, part of the working group, and Eline, in the work they've done in preparing the cases and the calls to action. Ideas from Europe has more sessions tomorrow, 3 more sessions. One of them is the last one, closing session at 3:30 to 5. And that's our wrap-up session. So that's where we bring the 4 thematic sessions together, and then Paul will represent this group tomorrow to summarize our call to action in this final session, where the Director General of the Ministry of Climate, of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, Director General for Entrepreneurship and Innovation will be present. So we can present in summary our findings to him. That's the immediate call to action. Longer term, a bit more longer term, we are working towards an event at the European Entrepreneurship Summit. So this was the European Roundtable as preparatory action for the European Entrepreneurship Summit that will be taking place in October. The date for that is 14 October. And then we will ideally scale up the initiative we've had so far. And of course, hopefully, the task force that we were asking for, together with EASE, we will have made steps towards it. If you want to get in contact with us, because it is all about collaboration, I think that message came through very clearly throughout all the cases today. Reach out to us on LinkedIn, our Ideas from Europe webpage on LinkedIn, or info@Ideas from Europe to get in contact with us and with the people here in the room. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Yillis.
Stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you
Thanks
for
very
organizing.
much. Thanks, everyone.